Laurel Jean Mitchell was born on May 24, 1958, in Whitley County, Indiana, to parents Richard and Wilma Mitchell. She grew up in North Webster, Indiana, with her siblings Sarah and Bruce. With a population of about 500 at the time, North Webster was extremely safe. A place where residents often did not lock doors, where parents felt comfortable letting their children ride bikes up and down the traffic-free streets. It was a community where everyone knew each other, and folks spent hours hanging out on their front porches. By 1975, 17-year-old Laurel was a senior at Wawasee High School. She was employed at Cokesbury Inn in the Epworth Forest neighborhood on the shores of Webster Lake. For her, working at the restaurant was a perfect opportunity to gain valuable experience while earning some extra money. She was determined to make the most of every moment, and with this attitude, she threw herself into the job with all the energy and enthusiasm she could muster. In no time, Laurel Mitchell had become a favorite among the staff and the customers. Laurel was involved in a local church youth group and was part of a traveling singing group called God's Children. They traveled all over the United States singing. The group had made some records and had a couple of albums. Laurel was described as very, very religious. Most of her free time was spent at the church. Despite the occasional argument, Laurel and her siblings had a tight-knit bond that only grew stronger with time. Laurel was a beloved figure in the community, where her warm smile and demeanor won over the hearts of everyone she met. One of her most endearing qualities was her unwavering kindness and her caring nature. The neighborhood children were particularly fond of Laurel. It was not uncommon to see her surrounded by children, all clamoring for her attention. Laurel had many talents. She had a natural gift for singing, so it was no surprise that she was a key member of the local church choir. Laurel was also an accomplished dancer who honed her skills by taking lessons at a local studio. For Laurel, singing and dancing were more than just hobbies. They were a way of life. August 6, 1975 started out as a typical day. Laurel and her siblings had morning chores that they completed. Laurel went to work at around 2 p.m. 12-year-old Sarah stayed home. Their brother Bruce was married and in the Army in California. One of Laurel's friends from Michigan stayed with the family. Laurel left work at the snack bar around 10 p.m. She was supposed to meet friends at the Adventureland amusement park about a half-mile walk away. One of her co-workers offered Laurel a ride, but she declined and said she'll walk instead. Laurel was seen walking towards the amusement park on the north side of North Webster. This was the last time she was seen alive. It was a family friend named Scott Pruitt who saw Laurel at the pillars of the entrance of Epworth Forest. He waved at her and she waved back at him. She then went past the pillars. Laurel never met up with her friends. They decided to go to the county fair instead. This included the friend from Michigan. As a result, no one was aware that Laurel was missing until she did not come home at midnight. Laurel was responsible, known to call her parents if she was going to be late arriving home. When she did not return home by curfew that night, her family knew something was wrong. It was confirmed when the friend from Michigan arrived at the Mitchell's house and asked, "Where's Laurel?" Her friends thought she went home, and her family thought she was with her friends. This led to her parents, Richard and Wilma Mitchell, reporting her as a missing person at 4:16 a.m. the next morning. The dispatcher took their information and promised to send a unit out to their home to take a report. An extensive search was then launched by the police, family members, and friends of Laurel. Richard Mitchell went out and walked the ditches up and down the road in case she had been hit by a car and thrown off to the side. Concerned neighbors and friends gathered together to search for her by combing through the woods and checking roadsides. Investigators determined that Laurel never made it to Adventureland. It was clear to them something happened on the way there. A few hours after being reported missing at 10:30 a.m., a fisherman named Glenn Dixon and his son found a woman's body in the Elkhart River at the Mallard Roost public access site on Noble County Road, 600 North, just west of 400 West. They called 911. The officers waded into the water and pulled the body up onto the bank. They reported seeing a white female laying face down on the west bank of the river near the boat landing ramp. The body was floating about waist deep. State police could not immediately identify the woman. They estimated the body had been there about a day. Police checked out missing persons reports in the area fitting the victim's description. She was described as 5'5", weighing about 160 pounds with long brown hair. Police then identified the woman as Laurel Mitchell with her class ring from Wawasee High School, class of 1976, with her initials LJM engraved inside. At first, investigators believed it was an accidental drowning, despite Laurel being a strong swimmer. That was until the autopsy report came back. The autopsy was performed later in the day on August 7, 1975, by Dr. P.L. Sankey at the Goshen General Hospital. The autopsy showed that she was forcibly drowned as well as assaulted. The autopsy also showed signs that Laurel made a violent struggle in order to survive. The police speculated that much of the evidence of the crime had washed away in the water, as only a small bruise was present on Laurel's hand and a few abrasions under her arms. After the discovery of Laurel, police vehicles pulled up outside Laurel's parents' home. Richard and Wilma were anxiously waiting for any news of their daughter's whereabouts. They were not prepared for the news that was about to be delivered to them. As the officers told them what had happened, Richard's eyes filled with tears. Wilma, as well, was inconsolable. Laurel's funeral was seen as a testament to the sense of community in North Webster. There were so many flowers at the funeral home that there was no room for the people. An enormous crowd of well-wishers, friends, and family members had come to pay their respects to Laurel Mitchell, who had been taken from them far too soon. They had to move the funeral to the church. Laurel's sister Sarah said that she does not remember the sermon at all. I just remember sitting between my dad and my brother, and they were both squeezing my hand so hard. When we walked out the door of the church, there were people lined up all down the street that couldn't even fit inside the church. The investigation into Laurel's demise intensified after her funeral, with detectives from multiple state and local agencies working round the clock to solve the case. They combed through evidence and interviewed many more individuals. A person called investigators at 3:15 p.m. on August 9, 1975. The person had some important information, but it was not clear. The caller hung up before they got the full message or her identity. Investigators made an appeal for the person to contact them again, and they would do their best to keep her identity private. Police set up a headquarters for the continuing investigation in North Webster. One local witness, identified as Catherine Flynn, said around 10 p.m. that night, she heard a loud car turn around next door. She said she heard voices say, "Let's get," or "Let's get her." Investigators interviewed Catherine, who lived half a mile east of Epworth Forest on Epworth Forest Road. She said she was home on Wednesday, August 6, 1975, and that around 10 p.m. or a little later, an old car turned into the drive next door and turned around as it came back by her house. She informed investigators that she heard several voices say, "Let's get," or "Let's get her." She said the car was very loud and probably a dark color. Another local, Frank Overmeyer, told investigators he also heard a loud vehicle in the neighborhood, possibly an Oldsmobile Cutlass. They went to interview Frank Overmeyer and his wife on August 14, 1975. The Overmeyers lived on Epworth Forest Road just west of Epworth Forest. Frank Overmeyer said on August 6, 1975, he was at home watching TV and heard a loud car go by, and the car turned around and stopped east of their house. Frank reported he then heard what he thought sounded like someone slamming the trunk on a car. Frank reported he turned on his porch light and stepped outside. When he stepped out, 2 cars were leaving the area. The first car was the one that had gone by his house that he described was a red-orange GM product, possibly an Oldsmobile Cutlass. The second vehicle was a medium green Mustang. The Oldsmobile was very loud and sounded like it was loud by design. All of the clothing and belongings found on Laurel's body were collected and preserved for DNA testing, including shoes, a sweatshirt, bra, underwear, and denim jeans. Unfortunately, due to the lack of DNA technology at the time, there was little that could be done with the clothing. Detectives from the Kosciuszko County Sheriff's Department and Indiana State Police examined the case closely through the years. The location of Laurel's abduction and the discovery of her body in the Elkhart River, about 15 miles from Epworth Forest, seemed to indicate that the perpetrator was familiar with the area. Many people were interviewed, and despite there being a $5,000 reward offered, there was never enough evidence to charge anyone. As weeks turned into months and months into years, the case slowly faded from the headlines and went cold. For Laurel's family and friends, the pain of her loss remained. In 2007, Indiana State Police Captain Kevin Smith was assigned as the lead investigator on Laurel's case. He was a man on a mission and was determined to provide answers that had eluded Laurel's family for so long. The pressure was on, but Captain Smith knew that he would do whatever it takes to give Laurel's loved ones the closure they deserved. Despite his best efforts, no new leads or evidence surfaced for several years, leaving him and his team frustrated. Then, on January 16, 2012, Laurel's father, Richard Mitchell, passed away. He was a well-known public figure in North Webster. Laurel's mother, Wilma Mitchell, also passed away in 2012. She operated the North Webster Food Pantry for several years. They passed never knowing what exactly happened to their 17-year-old daughter or why. It was a heartbreaking end for a couple who had dedicated their lives to seeking answers and closure for their daughter. In 2013, a woman called Renee from Port Charlotte, Florida, came forward and gave investigators a lot of useful information. Detective Donovan interviewed Renee on June 7, 2013. She informed the detective that she lived in Noble County as a teenager and that she was 16 years old in 1975. She went on a date with a man named John Wayne Lehman, and while on the date, they went to a party. After the party, John Wayne Lehman was driving her home when Lehman admitted his involvement in a crime that he committed with his friend, Fred Bandy Jr. Lehman provided details of the crime to Renee that are consistent with the findings made by police where Laurel's body was found and the anatomical findings made by Dr. Sankey during the autopsy of her body. On July 3, 2014, investigators interviewed Bill McDonald at the Ligonier Police Department. Bill indicated that back in 1975, he was a sophomore at West Noble High School and that he socialized with a man named Fred Bandy Jr. Bill told investigators that Bandy told him that he had committed the crime that took place at Mallard's Roost, which was a public access site adjacent to the location where Laurel's body was found. Also in 2014, Captain Kevin Smith received information about a local music group that performed in Epworth Forest the night of August 6, 1975. They were identified as the Celebrate the Sun group. This generated renewed interest in the case. Unfortunately, it did not lead anywhere. Captain Smith said, "I feel pretty confident after speaking with someone from that group. I don't believe they have information that will help." On September 25, 2019, Noble County Sheriff's Department Detective Joe Hutzel met with Rick Johnson to interview him about the Laurel Mitchell case. Rick Johnson informed Detective Hutzel that he was friends with Bill McDonald and that while he was in high school, he, Bill McDonald, Fred Bandy, John Wayne Lehman and others were at a party together. While at the party, a conversation about the slaying of Laurel Mitchell came up, and Fred Bandy Jr. stated he and John Wayne Lehman committed that crime together. Investigators needed more than just reports from witnesses. They needed DNA evidence linking Bandy and Lehman to the crime. Advances had been made in cold cases in recent years due to new technology such as genetic genealogy, which involves putting a suspect or victim's DNA profile into a public database, allowing them to reverse engineer a family tree. This enables investigation of multiple branches of a family's tree to determine who could be a viable suspect in an unsolved case. Another recent advancement factoring into solving cold cases is the use of touch DNA samples. This method requires minuscule amounts of DNA, such as skin cells from the perpetrator, that may be left on objects at a crime scene. A breakthrough enabling an accurate genotype from rootless hair is another technique now available. Until 2019, forensic scientists were only able to extract DNA from hairs found at crime scenes if the root of the hair was attached. Unfortunately, most hairs do not have the root attached. This breakthrough in DNA extraction from rootless hair is extremely useful in solving crimes. Solving cold cases often involves a diligent and time-consuming re-examination of evidence from files and the efforts of experienced investigators. By 2019, Laurel Mitchell's clothes and evidence were resubmitted for DNA testing. In February 2020, a certificate of analysis was generated by Indiana State Police Laboratory Division that showed a male DNA profile was developed from the clothing. After 3 suspects were eliminated as possibilities, attention shifted to Fred Bandy for a buccal swab. Bandy voluntarily provided the DNA sample on December 5, 2022 at his residence. On January 13, 2023, the state laboratory found that Fred Bandy Jr.'s buccal swab showed he is 13 billion times more likely to be the contributor of the DNA on Laurel Mitchell's clothing than any other unknown person. A review of Indiana State Police records also disclosed that Bandy was driving a 1971 Oldsmobile at the time, which is consistent with eyewitness statements from area residents on that fateful night. Investigators concluded that Lehman and Bandy, with premeditated malice, used Bandy's Oldsmobile to bring Laurel to the Mallard Roost public access site in Noble County, where they forcibly removed her from the vehicle and deliberately drowned her. While the Indiana State Police declined to comment on the specific techniques used to solve the case, Ashley Hall, the director of the Forensic Science graduate program at the University of California, explained. She said the method seemed to be a standard genetic identification technology used in crime labs called STR, or Short Tandem Repeat. The technology is developing to become more and more sensitive. It is being developed to pick up smaller and smaller amounts of DNA. We can pick up much more DNA than we used to be able to. Laurel Mitchell's case is a good example of the power and evolution of DNA testing to assist in criminal investigations, Dr. Hall said. We're not done with our work until every family, every victim has an answer, and the fact that we can go back to cases that are this old, this is where we should be going, she said. Captain Kevin Smith, who has been working the case for over 20 years, said, "This case is a culmination of a 5 decades-long investigation, and science finally gave us the answers we needed." Playing a significant role in charges being filed was the Indiana State Police Laboratory Division. We simply could not have solved this case without them. He also said that the investigation of the case had followed a similar pattern of other such cases. Witnesses pass away, memories fade. All those hurdles make it very difficult, especially when you go back this far. On Monday, February 6, 2023, the Indiana State Police arrested 67-year-old John Wayne Lehman and 67-year-old Fred Bandy Jr. It was announced to the public that John Lehman and Bandy Jr., both 67-year-old residents of Indiana, have been identified as the suspects responsible for what happened to Laurel Jean Mitchell. Bandy lived in 1014 5th Street in Goshen, Indiana, and Lehman lived at 108 Clark Street in Auburn, Indiana. Both are being held without bond at the Noble County Jail. This is not the first time that Fred Bandy Jr. is in trouble with the law. He is a twice-convicted child abuser and deemed a violent predator. In 2001, he pleaded guilty to child solicitation and contributing to the delinquency of a minor. In 2016, he pleaded guilty to 2 counts of child abuse and served nearly 6 years. During an initial hearing on February 8, 2023, Bandy and Lehman were informed by Noble Circuit Court Judge Michael Kramer they each face a charge of taking Laurel's life in the first degree. With current Indiana law, an individual convicted of such a charge faces a prison sentence between 45 and 65 years, with the advisory sentence being 55 years. However, since Laurel's slaying occurred in 1975, if the men are convicted, Bandy and Lehman could be sentenced to life in prison, which was the maximum possible prison sentence at that time. Also during the initial hearing, a pre-trial conference for both Bandy and Lehman was scheduled for 1:30 p.m. on April 24, 2023 in Noble County. Laurel's sister Sarah, who was 12 years old back in 1975, recently did an interview with the New York Times after the arrests were made. She described their childhood in North Webster as typical before the horror visited her family. It was just a very small town, laid back. We felt safe, she said. We came and went as we pleased in the summer, and parents did not worry about us. She was a really good person. It's like, gosh, you picked somebody really good to do this to, somebody who could have done a lot of good in this world. I'm very glad they were finally arrested and very appreciative of the people who came forward. Sarah recalled how Captain Smith had carried around big books that detailed the names and addresses of everyone the authorities had interviewed over the years. There were over 1,000 names in there, she said. When Captain Smith called Sarah and her brother Bruce Mitchell to let them know they had arrested 2 men, she was surprised, but mostly wished her parents had been alive to see it. It has been 47 years, she said, but right now it feels like yesterday. 12-year-old Sarah Mitchell was the only one that could sleep that night when Laurel did not arrive home. She woke up the next morning, more surprised than anything that her sister Laurel hadn't come home yet. Young Sarah had a softball game that day, and her parents encouraged her to still go to the game. About halfway through the game, a neighbor woman showed up in the Mitchell family's car. I saw her pull up to the ball diamond, Sarah said. Sarah immediately yelled at her coach that she had to go. The neighbor only told her that she had been sent to pick her up. When they neared the house, it was swarmed with police cars. The neighbor said they're there to look for her sister. I walked in the back door, and there was my dad. He was crying, Sarah said. He told her that Laurel was gone. Gone, she asked. It did not register in her 12-year-old mind. Gone where? Then her father broke the news. Her big sister, the one who used to have to take her everywhere because, well, that's what big sisters have to do, was not alive anymore. Sarah also said what she thought of Lehman and Bandy when she first saw them in court. At 12, they would have been scary. They look like very frail men. I do not need to be afraid of them. I am glad they are going to be punished, that they won't be able to hurt anyone else, but she's still not coming back to us. Convictions would not bring closure for me. I do not think there is such a thing. We will continue to grieve.